From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
I can remember vividly sitting in one of the seats as the vehicle kind of clicked through the gears from second to third. I can remember thinking yeah, this is loud. And I can remember feeling the vibration in my feet and in my back.
That's Rob Page, a former lieutenant colonel in the Army who was in charge of testing tanks, including the Army's fleet of the brand new Ajax armoured vehicles. They're supposed to be among the best in the world, but their rollout hasn't gone to plan.
And then a sense of the back door opening and getting out, getting back on my feet on the ground and feeling like that is just very strange compared to my 19 years of being on armoured vehicles.
Just describe how you felt when you got out.
Shock would be really strong, but surprised feels too weak. I certainly felt pins and needles in my feet and in my lower limbs. Immediately, just like the soldiers had reported to me, I had concerns that this wasn't quite right.
The Ajax programme has been plagued with problems, and just days after it finally got the go-ahead to be deployed in battle, it was revealed that soldiers had to be taken to hospital after a test run, with some experiencing hearing loss, headaches, and uncontrollable shaking.
Whole body vibration is a strange experience. You kind of literally feel a little bit jarred, if that makes sense. You just are aware that your body's kind of not happy with itself. In terms of the hearing, if you imagine going to a rock concert or a gig, you come out and your hearing doesn't feel quite right. You feel a little bit like, what? Like, blah, blah, blah. And that fades and goes. But the challenge is what damage has been done during the exposure.
The Army has now paused the use of the vehicles, which have already cost more than £5 billion, while their safety is being investigated. An announcement was expected earlier this week, but the deadline came and went, and the fate of the armoured vehicles still hangs in the balance.
The Army's done the right thing by stopping using the vehicle, and it will, I'm sure, be under investigation. But the best thing to do right now is to find out where is this hazard coming from and why.
8 years after these vehicles were first supplied to the Army, why are there still so many questions about their safety? And will the government spend more money on fixing the disaster or scrap the whole programme? We hear for the first time from one of the key whistleblowers in the Army who raised the alarm. The story today: the tanks accused of injuring soldiers.
All the journalists were invited to this day in Wales, where we knew that the Army was going to declare the Ajax vehicles were ready for operations. And that seemed like a huge moment, given all of the reports that we'd had previously of soldiers suffering from hearing loss.
Larisa Brown is defence editor at The Times. She's been looking into the problems with Ajax since 2021. And a few weeks ago, in November, she was in Wales as the Ajax fleet of vehicles was finally, nearly a decade late, declared ready for operations.
It felt like this momentous occasion. Luke Pollard, the Defence Minister, was there. He's the Minister for Defence Readiness. We met some of the soldiers that were using the vehicles. We went on the vehicle itself, and it was pretty fascinating. You had to put on this dual headset, which was to deal with the noise problem. So you have an inner earpiece and then this outer earpiece, which you put on as you get on the vehicle. And then it was pretty noisy. And then we all gathered round to speak to Pollard about what had happened, the vehicle itself and what it was going to do in future. And we were asking him, could the vehicle be sent to Ukraine, which he didn't rule out? And then, of course, the key question was, is the vehicle safe now? And Pollard said that he had been assured that the vehicle was safe. And he crucially said that the issues with the vehicle were firmly in the past. Now, we took that to mean very much firmly in the past, and obviously it turned out very soon afterwards that there were issues with the vehicle as recently as the summer.
Larisa, you've been writing about the story of Ajax armoured vehicles for a couple of years now. What's your impression of just how big a problem this has become for the army? I mean, we've heard of sort of procurement disasters before. How bad is this?
Well, I mean, yeah, I've been writing about it since the problems emerged in around 2021. Well, problems publicly emerged around that time, and they had to pause training on the vehicle. And it has been a huge problem for the army, because the future of the army, their plans for an armoured division, a modernised force, rests on Ajax. And there's billions of pounds that have been spent. 6.3 billion is the cost of the programme. So we're not talking about a small amount of money here.
Take us back to how the Ajax vehicles were initially commissioned. Give us a sense of what the army needed and why Ajax seemed to provide the answer.
So we're talking about 2010, so this is a long time ago now. And what the army wanted was to be able to replace what they had at the time, which was the CVRT vehicles. And this was a fleet of tracked reconnaissance vehicles. And the idea behind Ajax was that they wanted this fighting and reconnaissance vehicle. In a battlefield scenario, this would be the vehicle that would go first, using intelligence and its suite of sensors. It would try and ascertain where the enemy is. And it was meant to be coming into service in 2017, and obviously we've only just had that IOC being declared. That's the initial operating capability, so that's a really big moment for the army, where the vehicle is accepted into the army and it's ready for operations, ready to be deployed overseas.
To try and understand why there's been such a delay, why this has taken so many years to get to a point where the army might be able to use these vehicles, I suppose we'd better understand some of the characters involved. So firstly, tell us a bit about General Dynamics.
I mean, General Dynamics is originally an American firm, but they set up this site in Wales. They went from, I think, just a handful of employees to hundreds of employees. And, they've grown over the course of the programme. Without the Ajax programme, there's hundreds of jobs on the line. I mean, over the years, they've carried out thousands of miles of tests on the vehicle itself. It was quite early on in around 2019 when soldiers were reporting issues with the vibration of the vehicles. And then later on, they were then also reporting issues with the noise levels on the vehicles. So this started a long time ago, but it wasn't until 2021 that actually the use of the vehicle was paused altogether as they tried to work out what the actual issue was.
And we should say, General Dynamics have told us that soldier safety is their highest priority, and independent assessments confirm that noise and vibration levels in the Ajax vehicles are now within approved legislative limits. But the problems do seem to persist. I mean, you recently had a scoop talking about the number of people still being injured on trials. Tell us about that. What sort of injuries are we seeing, and just how bad is it?
I think that's what we were all really surprised by as journalists, because for years we've had, no mention really of there being any problems on the vehicles. We all go to Wales assuming that everything's sorted, they've addressed the root causes. Then it turns out that actually they've just given them better ear protection and also change some of the sort of basic design inside the vehicle, rather than come up with an engineering solution, for example, is my understanding. And then we hear that soldiers are still suffering from hearing problems and issues related to the vibration of the vehicles. And that did shock us because, I was stood there with Luke Pollard when we said to him, are the vehicles safe? And he said they were. He said he'd been assured that the vehicles were safe. Any issues were firmly in the past. And then I find out the next day that actually there were problems with the vehicle in the summer, and several troops had been hospitalised with these problems. So hearing issues, tinnitus, headaches. And then a few days after that, I then find out that there's been this huge training exercise, and more than 30 soldiers reported really serious problems in some cases. Some of them were getting off the vehicles vomiting. And my army sources were saying that some of the troops had come out of the vehicle shaking so much that they just couldn't control their bodies. It's all really, really worrying stuff. And they had to pause the exercise. After our story broke, we're then told by the MOD that they've paused the use of the vehicles again for a 2-week period while they try and carry out an assessment as to what's causing it. Now, the fact that they still don't know what's causing that problem is really surprising to me. I thought that they'd addressed this a long time ago.
When are we expecting to hear the answers?
Well, 2 weeks would have been Tuesday this week. I'm told that we're expecting a decision or an announcement of some sort next week.
Larisa, we've been aware of problems for a while now. Clearly people inside the army, when testing began, realised things were going wrong. Talk us through some of the investigations into what was going wrong over the years, because this is something that has received attention.
There were a couple of reports that were done, as well as an inquiry by the Defence Select Committee. Initially, there was a review by David King, who was the Director of Health, Safety and Environmental Protection at the Ministry of Defence, and this was published in the December. The first report was quite short, but there was a second report called the Sheldon Report, and this was a substantial document running into more than 100 pages. And in this report, it's clear that there were concerns raised, but actually they went ignored, and the wider system pushed through with the programme despite concerns at lower levels. Sheldon also repeatedly refers to a lieutenant colonel who is the commander of the Armoured Trials and Development Unit during a 2-year period between 2019 and 2021. And this commander is never named, but today we can reveal that that is Lieutenant Colonel Rob Page, who's speaking to us for the first time. He is the first person within the army that is going on the record to speak about his experiences leading those trials.
I'm Rob Page. I was in the army for 20 years. I started off in a regiment called the Royal Dragoon Guards. Challenger 2, the main battle tank, and I kind of joined the army in the same year. And I stayed with it right the way through. And I ended up as a lieutenant colonel in charge of the Armoured Trials and Development Unit from 2019 to 2021, where we were testing Warrior, Boxer and Ajax.
And Rob, just describe when Ajax comes on the scene. What was the state of the army's tanks and armoured vehicles, and what was its purpose?
By 2019, lots of the army's vehicle stock is ageing, and midlife upgrades are being considered or replacements are being considered. And with Ajax, the Armoured Corps, the Royal Armoured Corps, were super excited. You know, this was going to be a significant investment at the core of the army, a family of vehicles, over 500 on order. This is a really significant investment, a once-in-a-generation investment, and we're excited to sort of finally get our hands on it.
And there was clearly a great need for them, as you say. You know, a lot of the stock was in decline, needed an upgrade or was being cancelled. What was this suite of vehicles, Ajax, what was it supposed to be able to do?
So effectively, it's like almost like a Lego brick version of building a family of vehicles. So you start off with the same basic chassis and then you add bits to it depending on its role. And some of them you don't add a lot to. So the command and control variant is going to have a lot of radios, a lot of antenna, a lot of harness work. The ambulance obviously has to have all the internal work to handle stretchers. So it covered everything from repair, recovery, crossing obstacles to a certain degree, Aries, the general variant to move people around, and then the turreted version.
What does that look like?
It looks formidable, right? It's got a 40mm cannon. It's got the turret, which elevates the height of it and just makes it look a bit stockier. And yeah, it's exciting.
You can see why it gets commissioned. You can see why the army opt for it. You were one of the first people to be able to go and test it out, to see what it's really like. It's a hugely exciting moment, as you say. At what point do you start to worry?
Well, first off, everyone on the team is fairly experienced with using armour. And so when experienced soldiers come and say, oh, we've got to worry about this, you immediately listen. And my job as a CO is twofold. It's firstly to make sure the trials are conducted safely. Secondly, to look after the safety and risk to life of the soldiers.
Theo, you're the commanding officer. You're in charge of all of this.
Yeah,
It's
and I'm
your
also the
responsibility.
duty delivery holder, which means that I am responsible for the well-being of the soldiers.
What were people coming to you and saying? What were the complaints they were bringing to you?
So in 2019, we started with vibration, realistically, and the soldiers reporting symptoms in their lower back, their wrists, their feet, and that was all covered in the King and the Sheldon report.
And these are all worse than they'd experienced in any other tanks or any other armoured vehicles?
Yeah, and I think there are some biases there. You know, people are like, well, all armoured vehicles are noisy and all armoured vehicles shake. And that's true. Of course they do. They're really complex, heavy systems. But when it's, you know, beyond what one has experienced before, of course that raises a concern. So the immediate action that I wanted was instrumentation. And so I wanted measurements taken inside the vehicle so we could understand what the hazard was and where it was coming from. Because in an armoured vehicle, you've got tracks, suspension, a massive engine, gearbox. All of these things could be causing vibration hazard. Unfortunately, that wasn't taken up. So I think as far as General Dynamics, the manufacturer, were concerned, they'd done that work and provided data. I wanted more, and that would cost to do, right? So we'd have to...
So this is more testing, effectively.
Exactly.
And there's a cost attached to that.
Exactly. And so that wasn't taken forward. What we did have is some experts from the Institute of Naval Medicine who came to do an advisory visit. Why them? They're really good at putting a nuclear reactor, nuclear weapons inside a submarine and making it nearly silent.
Wow.
So if you want some expertise in how to look at these things as an engineering problem, they are real national experts. And so they came and did a visit. We took them out on a couple of runs and tests, and they wrote a report. One of their recommendations was around reducing speed in order to reduce the level of vibration. And I didn't see that recommendation until much later in the process. Had that report been on broader circulation, I think we would have introduced a more stringent control earlier.
As time goes on, it's not just people coming to you saying, look, we feel quite rattled having been in this vehicle. It does feel worse than others. You do start to get people with symptoms, people who are suffering as a result of their experiences in these vehicles. How bad did it get?
The key thing is hearing. So hearing's one of your primary senses, and losing it is a permanent disability.
Yeah.
The King report highlights this issue of harm and what the Army's understanding of harm is. And to be honest, I remember him coming to Bovington and lots of us being in that room and him saying, what do you understand harm to be? And we all didn't really know, because I don't think it's really a question that we talk about. We talk about risk, okay? And we talk about risk to life and limb and eye and all the rest of it. And so one of the challenges is defining what is harm and when are we doing harm. How did I feel about it? There comes a point where you look inwardly and you say, am I getting this wrong? And I felt that responsibility really keenly. Again, my two roles: make sure the trial's safe, make sure the soldiers are safe. That's difficult. There's a lot of contemplation there. There's a lot of, who haven't I talked to? Is there another expert out there that I should be talking to that I'm not talking to? And in particular, the hearing I found really concerning, because I've always felt that that's, you know, a primary sense that one doesn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And also the soldiers are younger than me, right? So I'm 40 at the time. They are younger than me on the whole. And, you know, it's not an injury. It's a disability, and that's the key difference. If you lose your hearing, that's a permanent impairment that's not going to come back. So I was really, really, really troubled by that.
And it impairs your career too, as a soldier.
Well, more importantly, impairs your life.
Yeah.
So once we stopped trials completely, lots of us got sent to Queen Elizabeth Hospital for screening checks. Again, that's all in the Sheldon report. And I had a conversation there with Defence's senior clinician on hearing, and it's a real humbling moment for me because I found myself in that bias of, well, maybe this isn't that bad. And she was like, Rob, like, here's your chart. I was like, okay. I was like, I don't understand what this means. And she's like, well, let me put this just another way. She was like, how often do you ask people to repeat what they say to you? And I said, yeah, I do that. I do that quite a lot. And she said, okay, when you're in a crowded room, can you pick out individual voices? And I said, no, I find that really hard. And she's like, and do you have tinnitus? And I was like, yeah, I do have that a lot recently. And so that's the dawning realisation. And the final impactful thing she said to me, she said, look, you're 40 now and your hearing's like all right. It's not great, but it's all right. But everybody's hearing degrades over time and yours is going to accelerate way quicker now because you're starting off at a lower point. And that for me was really impactful.
Rob will never be sure if his hearing loss was caused directly by Ajax, but between 2017 and 2020, he was told that he'd lost 20% of his hearing, and he didn't serve on any other armoured vehicles over that period. You've started to realise that there are clearly problems with these vehicles. What do you do? Because you're sort of, in your role, you're in charge of testing. You're sandwiched between the company that's producing them and what they're telling you and sort of the headquarters of the army who you're reporting back to. Who do you go to and what sort of response do you get?
Yeah, and the third leg of the stool there is Defence Equipment and Support, who are effectively Defence's buyer, if you like. I did feel I raised issues as early as I had them. I did that in sometimes quite colourful ways.
Tell us all.
So I think the one that's in the Sheldon report is the Chernobyl email. So the Chernobyl scenario is when there's a load of radioactive material on the roof of a reactor and the Russians get conscript soldiers to sweep the debris back into the reactor core. And they do that on a 3-minute timer. Because the idea is like they're exposed for such little time that they'll be okay. Obviously, they're not okay. So the point I was trying to map out for the army was we've got an unknown hazard, but we know it exists. We have injured soldiers and are injuring soldiers. And the response is we will just have some controls around time, speed, and exposure. I still felt we hadn't instrumented. We still hadn't diagnosed the root cause. And for me, the orientation was around the soldier. So it was like, wear bigger headphones, have a more padded seat, have rubber mats, all of this sort of stuff.
And not around the vehicle.
Exactly. And I felt like we should have, and I did propose this at the time, we should be doing a rubber track trial.
What does that mean?
So Ajax in its current form has a steel track and a suspension system. Rubber tracks replaces those steel tracks completely. And we know from a trial that we did with Warrior a good while ago now that it significantly reduces noise and vibration.
I mean, this sounds like a potential solution without having to scrap all of the expensive vehicles that have just been bought.
Well, the answer is, who knows? The answer is to do the test, right? So I think we are in a world where we still need to diagnose what the root cause is and why it's happening.
And yet that was 5 years ago. Why have we managed to get to a point now where it still hasn't been fixed? I mean, what were the challenges you were coming up against?
So I haven't been involved for 5 years, so I don't know what's happened in terms of engineering fixes between now and then. But I go back to this diagnosis is the absolute priority. So there's clearly some sort of hazard that's causing these symptoms, and so understanding and investing as much as we can, as quickly as we can, in getting to absolute truth on that is vital. What I would say, though, is just as the safety management aspect is systemic, an armoured vehicle is a system of systems. So it won't be a silver bullet of just one thing and it will be fixed. That's why it needs to have the proper engineering community around it.
Is one of the reasons it's still causing trouble now, years after you were last looking at it. Is it because the army gets quite defensive about something they've spent so much money on?
I'm not sure I'd recognise that.
But what are the cultural problems that have sort of meant it hasn't been fixed yet? It still hasn't even been properly diagnosed.
So I think the Sheldon report was keen to point out that the systemic issues around the governance are challenging. And that's right. Like earlier on, we highlighted that there's this relationship between the army, defence equipment support, and the manufacturer and the units or the trials units. So that's complex enough. There are different directorates in the army in terms of capability and programmes. I think those things have been brought closer together, which is great. So at the minute, we've got a capability gap in the army, which the army believes Ajax is the answer to. But we need to, as quickly as possible, solve what's wrong with it. Otherwise, our deterrence posture, doesn't look as robust as it might.
Other countries who might want to challenge us will look at that and laugh, basically, or won't feel like we're particularly well protected.
I don't think it's so much that. I think it's just like soldiers deserve the capability that fits within that window of, cost, excellence, and ease of use. And sometimes those three things are really difficult to balance, but that is the challenge of producing, world-class capability. And we as a country can do that, right? Just look at some of the other systems that we export.
Who do you think is to blame for this? Or if there was one thing that you could fix about the culture or the systems in place that would mean a problem like this wouldn't arise again, or it would be solved so much faster, what would that be?
So the first thing I would say is let's get off blame, right? Let's get off blame. That doesn't really get us anywhere. And it's a huge waste of time, energy and resource. Simplification is where I would go to. And sometimes I used to find it frustrating. If you're the person that's closest to the hazard and the risk, your judgment should be really important. And so quite often I think there's a couple of military sins, if you like, in this. And the first off is what is it about your experience that invalidates mine? And that's a key question. The second thing is progress isn't the same as accomplishment. An easy example of this is when you go to open a can of Coke, you might perform the task, but it doesn't open. But repetition, and it still doesn't open, you need to do something different, right? And the third one is activity versus success. So what we want to do and what we want to see is the successful delivery of this programme. And that has got to be about asking the right questions, mobilising the right experts and advice, and recognising there isn't a quick fix, and getting to the origin of the hazard, treating it appropriately, fixing it appropriately. That's what we need to do.
Larisa, Rob is determined not to play the blame game around this. But a lot of people will wonder, altogether the Ajax programme has cost £6.3 billion. It still hasn't led to vehicles that are able to be used. Who is ultimately accountable for the failure of this process?
Well, back in 2023, that Sheldon report found that there were systemic problems, and it wasn't that there was any one individual that should be to blame for the failures of the programme. And at the time, there was quite a lot of pressure on the government to find an individual that was responsible and ensure that they were no longer overseeing the programme, but that didn't happen. Now it's unclear because clearly junior soldiers aren't happy. They clearly still feel ignored and feel that the problems haven't reached the higher levels. Luke Pollard, interestingly, told the Defence Committee last week that he had been assured by senior army officers that the vehicle was safe, and he actually named Rowley Walker, that's General Sir Rowley Walker, the head of the army, as telling him that the vehicle was safe. And some people saw that as him basically throwing him under the bus over it. And then we asked John Healey, the Defence Secretary, just a few days ago, did he have confidence in Walker? And he said he did. So that sort of leaves open the question of, did somebody ignore the concerns of soldiers? There is clearly a blame game going on inside the Ministry of Defence as everyone tries to make clear that they were honest and did act with integrity when they were listening to the concerns of the soldiers.
I mean, similarly for the army, is this such a totemic programme? It's such a big investment. It's very hard for them to turn around and say it's just not working.
I think that's the problem here, is you've spent billions of pounds. You need this capability. You need a reconnaissance vehicle. It's part of army plans to modernise the force. What do you do if you just suddenly get rid of it? You're going to then have to invest more money in another platform. But I think now there's a feeling that there isn't really a choice to scrap it, although Healey said he's prepared to.
So the politicians are prepared to scrap this altogether. What would that mean?
Healey told us on a visit recently to Portsmouth, he said that he was prepared to axe the programme. But in terms of what that would mean, well, it would cost all the jobs in Wales. It would leave the army with a capability gap. And Healey was asked, could the army fight tonight without this vehicle? He said yes. I know that there were a lot of questions in Wales. Why do we need this vehicle in the first place? Why can't we just use drones? I mean, the answer to that officially was that the drones can't stay in the sky for days on end, whereas Ajax could, be out carrying out patrols for a long period of time. And the drones were reliant on good weather and battery life, whereas Ajax wasn't. But I don't know, maybe you could get some drones instead. I mean, I don't know, but that was a suggestion in Wales.
Do you think it'll be scrapped?
I think it won't be. But I'm not sure what they're going to say is the solution, because if you say you want to swap the tracks, the metal tracks for rubber ones, well, that's going to cost a lot more money. So does the British taxpayer want more money to be spent on this programme?
Larisa, for people listening, this comes at a time where we're constantly hearing that defence desperately needs more money so that we can all feel secure in this country. When you see huge procurement programmes like this going so wrong, it's hard for people to have the confidence that when they get the money, it'll be spent well. I mean, that must be a nightmare for them right now.
Of course, and £6 billion is an awful lot of money, and for it to be potentially wasted is obviously horrifying. And the issue the MOD's got at the moment is it hasn't got that new money this year or next year, and it will be getting that new money in future. But they are really trying to find the cash for new programmes, and there is a huge black hole. There is extreme pressure on the army to modernise, but without this new money coming anytime soon. And so if you just scrap Ajax, I think that's going to cause a lot of problems for the service.
When we asked the Ministry of Defence about this story, they issued a statement saying, "We will always put the safety of our personnel first, and the current pause shows that we will investigate any issues when they arise." The concerns raised by Lieutenant Colonel Page in 2019 were looked at under the previous government in the 2023 Sheldon Review. We take any allegations very seriously and will look closely at any evidence provided. It said a ministerial-led review into the Ajax programme would assess how effective the department had been at implementing the actions of previous reviews and seeking anything further that's required regarding safety. We also asked General Dynamics UK, the company that manufactures the Ajax vehicles, who came back to us saying, "Soldier safety is our highest priority at General Dynamics UK. Since February 2023, independent assessments confirm that noise and vibration levels are within approved legislative limits. Now, with over 170 vehicles fielded across 12 Army units and a further 62,000 kilometres covered with Army crews since 2024, we have full confidence that this vehicle meets customer specifications. The technical investigation, conducted jointly by General Dynamics UK, the Army and DE&S, which included a whole vehicle system and subsystem design assessment, led to a comprehensive analysis of root causes, comparison with all other armoured vehicles, and design changes that have been subjected to rigorous testing, including user validation in operationally representative conditions, fully documenting and validating the safety and compliance of the vehicles. Ajax now holds the most comprehensive safety case of any armoured platform worldwide, covering vibration, acoustics, ergonomics, and crew health. This is one of the most tested combat vehicles ever produced. We are committed to delivering this important capability to the British Army and the Ministry of Defence to support the United Kingdom's role in NATO. We have full confidence in the performance and the protection it provides our soldiers. It is the world's most advanced, fully digitised, armoured fighting vehicle. That was Larisa Brown, defence editor at The Times, and before that, Rob Page, former Lieutenant Colonel in the Army. You can find all of our coverage on the Ajax programme online at thetimes.com. The producer today was Harry Stott, the executive producer was Kate Lamble, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.